Cissy Patterson, the lonely queen of the newspaper empire. Hello. Tonight, we will not travel back to the distant past of mystical Eastern dynasties, but instead, we will cross the ocean together to arrive in cold Chicago at the end of the 19th century. Imagine yourself standing in the middle of oak-shaded Prairie Avenue, where the chill from Lake Michigan drifts past the proud marble mansions of the American elite. The pungent scent of printer's ink from the Chicago Tribune headquarters, blending with the fragrance of expensive French perfume, guides you into a life filled with paradoxes and bitter glory. We are about to step into the story of Cissy Patterson's biography for sleep, a woman hailed as the uncrowned queen of the American media empire, who used her power to fill the vast voids within her soul. Part 1. Born into the powerful Chicago newspaper dynasty. The quartz mantel clock strikes a steady rhythm, marking 10:20 on the night of the 7th of November, 1881. You let out your first cry in the heart of Chicago, in a room thick with the scent of candle wax and the suppressed tension of servants holding their breath. The space around you is not merely the warmth of a home, but the proud coldness of a media empire at its brilliant peak. You, Eleanor, Josephine Medill, Patterson, or Cissy, are not simply an infant. You are the newest piece, a precious asset added to the balance sheet of the powerful Medill clan. Outside the window, the wind from Lake Michigan howls through the streets of a city rising from the ashes of the Great Fire. But inside these mansion walls, everything is silent and absolute. Your existence from your very first breath is tied to headlines and high-stakes political gambles. Your grandfather, Joseph Medill, is not just a man, he is an institution. As the former mayor of Chicago and the soul of the Chicago Tribune, he used ink and newsprint to mold the face of post-Civil War America. You lie in a mahogany cradle, lined with the finest silk, yet you are actually positioned within a dense web of power, where your every cry is calculated as a continuation of the fervent Republican bloodline. Your grandfather's $8 million fortune does not just sit in bank vaults. It exists in your every fiber, your every heartbeat. It is a pure form of power, the kind that could put a man like Abraham Lincoln in the White House and crush anyone who dared obstruct the Medill empire. You grow up in the suffocating abundance of the Gilded Age, where every object around you carries a price equivalent to a worker's lifetime of labor. The Prairie Avenue mansion is a fortress of oak and Italian marble, where your footsteps are swallowed by thick imported Oriental rugs. You feel the chill emanating from the sculptures and the artificial polish of the intricately carved oak banisters. This building, with its 40-plus rooms, is not a home. It is a museum of extravagance where you are but a small exhibit. The stone entrance hall, worth tens of thousands of dollars, stands as a silent declaration of status, making anyone who enters feel small before the wealth of the Patterson and Medill families. Your world is narrowed to the mansion's east wing, where 8 rooms dedicated to the nursery are decorated like a miniature palace. You look up at French wallpaper depicting peaceful pastoral scenes, yet your life is a schedule programmed with the precision of a printing press. Gifts of silver and gold flow into your cradle like a waterfall, but they bring no warmth. They are appraised items, much like you will eventually be. The $10,000 trust fund from your grandfather is a commitment to the future, but also an invisible chain binding you to the family's expectations. An army of servants surrounds you, from the English nanny to the Irish maid. They care for you not with love, but with the devotion of those preserving a precious antique. You move between family palaces like a little princess on a never-ending tour. Winter in the warmth of the prairie fireplaces, summer in the Lake Michigan breeze at Medill Cottage, and autumn at your grandfather's grand estate. Yet, no matter where you are, the air you breathe is thick with printer's ink and elite calculation. Your family's wealth is not a quiet enjoyment. It is a public performance, where every dress you wear and every toy you hold is a tool to assert dominance in Chicago and Washington society. Your daily schedule begins early under the strict supervision of hired staff. At exactly 7 in the morning, warm milk is brought in on a silver tray. At exactly 8, you are placed in a porcelain bath with the most modern heating system of the time. Everything around you must reach absolute perfection. You wear clothes where the value of a single button could support a poor family for an entire month, only to stroll through Lincoln Park as a living symbol of prosperity. You learned very early that your image is more important than your emotions. You are a long-term investment project for your mother Nellie, who views your beauty and education as currencies to be traded on the international marriage market. When you turn 5, the meager freedom of childhood vanishes, replaced by rigorous lessons with a French tutor. You learn to pronounce the nasal vowels of French, not to understand the thoughts of great philosophers, but to utter hollow social graces at elite dinner tables. Your French must be perfect, not for communication, but for the display of elegance. Piano lessons with Professor Herman on the massive Steinway Grand are the same. Each note you drop onto the keys is not to soothe the soul, but to train the patience and poise of a lady. You learn to sit still for hours, keeping your back straight and your facial expressionless, while inside you, a rebellious fire begins to kindle. Your education is a process of gradually stripping away personal identity. At prestigious boarding schools like Miss Porter's, you are molded into the most refined asset. They teach you to dance so you can spin gracefully on the ballroom floor. Teach you embroidery so your hands always appear femininely busy. And teach you just enough literature to never seem too intelligent in front of a powerful man. You are not taught how to run the family newspaper, despite it being the source of every luxury you enjoy. You are not taught politics or economics, the very breath of your grandfather and father. In the family's eyes, a woman with an independent intellect is a defective product, and they are working their hardest to ensure you are as perfect a piece of merchandise as possible. The irony begins here. You are born into a family that holds the power to shape a nation's thoughts, yet you are forbidden from having thoughts of your own. Every book you read is screened. Every word you speak is corrected. You realize that love in this house is a scarce and conditional commodity. Your mother, Nellie Medill Patterson, is a ruthless quartermaster of social expectations. She looks at you not with a mother's eyes, but with the eyes of an art appraiser examining an unfinished painting. Nellie runs the mansion with the coldness of a general managing occupied territory. You always feel her presence through sharp criticisms of your posture or the way you hold a teacup. Stand up straight and you're slouching again are the refrains that haunt your childhood. She never embraces you for comfort. She only touches you to adjust a ribbon or tuck away a stray lock of hair. To her, your perfection is an obligation, and any flaw is a betrayal of the clan. You learn a bitter lesson from your mother. Beauty is a depreciating asset, and you must know how to sell it while its value is highest. Beauty fades, she often tells you in an emotionless tone, and you need to use it while you have it. Meanwhile, your father, Robert Patterson, is a distant ghost in his own home. He hides behind thick stacks of the Chicago Tribune and long meetings at the office. To him, you are like an exquisite piece of furniture placed in the wrong room, something to be preserved, but not necessarily interacted with. His presence in your life consists only of indifferent nods and breath heavy with the scent of ink and cigars. You crave a look of recognition from him, but he only sees you as part of Nellie's master plan. Your father's emotional absence creates a vast void in your soul, one that neither money nor power can later fill. Your pain is deepened by the blatant gender bias within the family. Your brother, Joseph Medill Patterson, is the son, while you are merely a small satellite orbiting the expectations placed upon him. Joseph is groomed to inherit the press throne, taught political intrigue and empire management. He is encouraged to have opinions, to argue, and to become a strong man. You, however, are welcomed only as an unwanted substitute for the boy the family truly desired. Your sister, Josephine, is a living warning of the fragility of elite women. She lives in the shadow of headaches and sedatives, a porcelain doll cracked under pressure. You look at your sister and understand that if you are not strong, you too will end up as a permanent dependent, living on the family's pity. Your grandfather, Joseph Medill, is the shadow looming over everything. He is the giant you must always look up to, with a mixture of fear and admiration. He is not cruel in the conventional sense, but he views everyone around him as tools for the grand purpose of the newspaper and the Republican Party. When he speaks to Joseph about the future of America and the power of the media, you stand there, silent and invisible. When he turns to you, he doesn't ask for your thoughts. He only reminds you of your posture. Before him, you feel yourself shrinking into a list of defects. You are too emotional, too frivolous, too desperate for recognition, traits he considers female weaknesses. But he does not know that the very iron will and stubbornness he possesses have been fully inherited by you. The seeds of rebellion begin to show through your fire-filled green eyes. You are not a compliant porcelain doll. You have reddish blonde hair that serves as a warning of the rage within. At 8 years old, you are ready to fight a neighbor boy just because he dared to insult your brother. At 10, you dare to shout at your father in the middle of a formal dinner party, breaking every rule of decorum your mother painstakingly built. You have the sharp intelligence of a natural-born journalist, but that intelligence is viewed as a burden. At 12, when you announce you want to write for the paper like your grandfather, the family's mocking laughter nails itself into your self-esteem. You realize a devastating truth. You were born to rule, but this society only requires you to obey. The conflict between your fierce ego and the rigid rules forces you to learn how to live a double life. You learn to wear a perfect smiling mask in public, while inside you is a storm of unacknowledged ambitions. You bury yourself in novels, seeking solace in stories of women who have the power to choose their own destinies. But every time you close the book, the reality of tea parties and dance lessons drags you back. You know you are living in a script written by others, where you are merely a supporting actress decorating the glory of the Medill family. The first major turning point comes in 1899 when you are 17. The death of your grandfather, Joseph Medill, is not just a funeral. It is a historical event that shakes Chicago. You stand among the crowd of politicians and press titans, watching tears fall on powerful faces. But with instinctive sensitivity, you realize a chilling truth. No one is truly crying for Joseph Medill the man. They cry for the status he left behind. They cry for the privileges they just lost as the great tree fell. That funeral is a play about power, where sincerity has no place. You see the emptiness behind the mourning rituals, and you understand that in this world, If you do not have power, you are nothing. After the funeral, the transfer of power is brutal and naked within your own family. You happen to overhear the murmurs of your uncle, Robert McCormick, regarding the inheritance. The old bastard split the stock evenly between Nellie and Kate. He says with spite, the daughters. He didn't trust the men to hold it. Suddenly, Nellie, your cold mother, becomes one of the most powerful women in America. You witness the immediate change in the house. Arguments over the paper's budget, board meetings held right in the living room, and the irreparable rift between your mother and your Aunt Kate. You watch your mother reach out and grasp power, but you also see her become lonelier and more bitter than ever. While your brother Joseph is at Yale preparing for his mission to inherit, and your sister Josephine sinks further into dependency, you realize your position has been decided. You are the final chip in Nellie's plan to solidify her status. You must have a perfect marriage, one that brings a title or an international political alliance. Your early years close amid the quarreling of the women who hold the media empire, leaving you in the middle of a brutal elite marriage market. You step out of childhood with a massive fortune, a radiant beauty, and a heart longing to be set free from this golden cage. The shadows of dusk begin to cover the Chicago mansion as you step out onto the porch, feeling the chill of the Lake Michigan wind through your expensive fur cloak. You hear the clip-clop of horse hooves on the stone road in the distance, where a luxury carriage waits to take you to the first ball of your life. You step down the marble stairs, your silk shoes touching the cold surface, preparing to enter a world where your every dance move will be appraised, and your every look is the beginning of a treacherous marital calculation. Part 2. Entering high society and meeting the Count. The silk ribbon tightens around your waist, a familiar sense of suffocation as the corset is pulled to its absolute limit. The scent of talcum powder and rose water fills the cramped space of the dressing room, where maids hurry to finalize every detail of your appearance. You stand as still as a statue, watching your reflection in the mirror. A 19-year-old girl with green eyes, reflecting both expectation and unease. This is the winter of 1901, and tonight you will no longer be little Eleanor of the nursery. You will step out there, under the light of 1,000 candles, to officially become a precious commodity on the Chicago elite's marriage market. This debutante season is not a coming-of-age ceremony. It is a public auction, and your mother Nellie holds the gavel. Your mother stands behind you, her sharp eyes scrutinizing every fold of the white silk dress embroidered with pearls from the famed House of Worth in Paris. The dress costs $4,000 a sum, large enough to buy a house for a middle-class family, but to you, it is merely an exquisite shell. You feel the weight of the $25,000 pearl necklace pressing against your collarbone, cold and heavy like a vow of status. Those pearls are not just jewelry. They are an invisible chain linking you to the family's history. Nellie adjusts a lock of hair on your forehead with the focus of a jeweler polishing a gemstone before it goes on display. Everything must be perfect, because tonight, your existence will be appraised by the most demanding eyes of the elite. As the ballroom doors open, a gust of air thick with the scent of orchids and roses hits you. $10,000 worth of fresh flowers has transformed the Patterson mansion into a tropical garden in the heart of a frozen Chicago winter. You enter the hall, and immediately, the murmurs of 400 guests ripple through the air like a small wave. Railway tycoons, banking magnates, and descendants of old dynasties are watching you. You begin your first dance steps to the rhythm of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, spinning in the arms of young men bearing illustrious names. But in that moment, you feel like a prized racehorse having its muscles and gait inspected before a major race. The praises of your radiant beauty are, in fact, merely assessments of the profitability of an investment deal. The social season stretches on like an exhausting march. Your everyday is a series of tightly scheduled social obligations. A morning dress for calls, a tea dress for receiving guests, and a ball gown to shimmer under the stage lights. You are never permitted to wear the same outfit twice, as repetition is a sign of financial decline. Your wardrobe costs $8,000 for a single season, a terrible waste for which you are merely the mannequin. You learn to smile mysteriously and tilt your head at the right angle to catch the light, but your heart remains silent amidst the noise of the upper class. You look at your mother after every party, waiting for a nod of satisfaction, but all you receive are remarks about who noticed you and who holds the most valuable fortune. Very soon, bounty hunters and heirs begin to surround you like moths to a press light. There are wealthy cousins, like Medill McCormick, in whom you see only cowardly weakness behind a polished exterior. And then there is Frederick McLaughlin, the man who persistently sent you flowers every day for 6 months. You once felt a flicker of warmth around Frederick, a hint of sincerity in a sea of calculation. But when you mentioned his name, your mother only curled her lip in cold contempt. "He's a coffee heir," she said, and that single sentence erased Frederick from the list of those allowed to touch your life. In your mother's world, money was not enough. It had to be accompanied by a title, a lineage that could elevate the Medill name to the level of European dynasties. Frustrated with the choices in Chicago, Nellie decided to take you to Europe in the summer of 1903. This trip was cloaked as an educational journey, but you knew well that you were participating in the dollar princess trend. You were like an American gold shipment seeking an old, tarnished European crown in exchange. You carried trunks filled with the trendiest outfits and letters of introduction to ancient courts. You crossed the squares of London, the boulevards of Paris, and finally stopped in Vienna, where the glory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire still glowed with its final breaths before fading away. In Vienna, you entered a world of rigid diplomatic etiquette and classical luxury under the patronage of your uncle, Ambassador Robert Sanderson McCormick. You found yourself standing in magnificent halls where gilded walls reflected brilliant uniforms and the most splendid evening gowns in Europe. The press called you one of the Three Graces, a title that made you feel like a goddess on Olympus but was, in reality, that of a prisoner of expectation. The smell of Viennese coffee and thick cigar smoke in embassy lounges became the soundtrack to your new life. And it was here, amidst the melodies of the Blue Danube Waltz, that you met the man who would end your free youth. Count Joseph Gizicki appeared before you not as a hunter, but as a charming savior. He carried the ruggedness of a man in his 40s, with eyes that had seen through the games of Paris and St. Petersburg. Gizicki had a way of speaking that made you feel like the center of the universe, something you had never received from your distant father or controlling mother. He did not ask about your family's fortune. He asked about your thoughts, the books you had read, and a distant America he longed to understand. That intense attention was a sweet poison you were willing to sip to forget the surrounding loneliness. He invited you to the oldest opera houses and arranged private tours of the Schönbrunn Palace, where even the walls breathed centuries of history. When he sent you a first edition of the poet Goethe with a romantic note, For a woman who deserves poetry written in her honor, though none exists worthy of her, you completely fell. You did not see behind those flowery words a debtor drowning in gambling, a man who needed your money to save his decaying estates in Poland. You only saw an escape, a chance to leave Nellie's grip and enter a world of shimmering noble titles. The bitter irony lay in the fact that your mother was the one pushing for this marriage most forcefully. She saw in Gizicki a count's crown that could be pinned to the Patterson family reputation. She did not care that he was 20 years your senior or that he had a deceased wife. To her, this was a perfect transaction. One evening, while personally adjusting your necklace before the mirror, she uttered words you would never forget. "This is exactly the kind of match I brought you here to make." Those words were like a pronounced sentence. You timidly asked about what you actually wanted, and she only replied with a question that stripped away all your power. "Then what exactly do you want?" And you were silent, because you realized you had never been taught to want anything for yourself. On an October afternoon in 1903, amidst the perfectly manicured trees in the gardens of Schönbrunn Palace, Josef Gizicki knelt before you. You saw the emerald ring surrounded by diamonds, shining under the pale Viennese autumn sun. You also saw your mother sitting on a bench not far away, her gaze never leaving the two of you, like a supervisor waiting for the results of a successful experiment. You nodded, and the coldness of the gemstone touched your finger, marking the beginning of a permanent bondage. You had accepted becoming Countess Gizicka, a title that sounded grand but carried the price of your entire life. News of the engagement broke in the American papers like a bomb. Your family's Chicago Tribune proudly ran the headline, "Miss Eleanor Patterson to wed Polish Count." They praised his tens of thousands of acres of estate and his lineage dating back to the 14th century. But not a single line mentioned the mortgage debts or the times he had been barred from casinos. You stood in your bedroom, watching the wedding invitations being printed en masse, a sense of unease rising in your heart like a cold omen. You tried to reassure yourself that this was what every girl of your status dreamed of, but deep in your soul, you felt you were preparing to enter a foreign land where the only language you knew was submission. The chill of the Viennese autumn drifts through the window curtains as you look out at the street where carriages glide over ancient stone roads. You pick up a small leather suitcase, feeling its rough surface under your fingertips as servants begin loading dozens of large trunks into the carriage. You step down the hotel stairs, your leather shoes touching the damp stone surface, preparing to begin the journey to the remote land of Nowosiolka, where an old castle waits to become your home, or perhaps your inescapable prison. Part 3. The abusive marriage to the Polish Count. The weight of the $50,000 diamond tiara presses against your forehead, leaving a painful red mark that even thick layers of makeup cannot hide. You stand before the large mirror in your bedroom at the DuPont Circle mansion, looking at your own reflection, a radiant bride in handmade lace from the House of Worth. Yet your green eyes hold a silent terror. Today is the 14th of April, 1904. The day you officially place your life in the hands of a man your family calls a fortune hunter. You hear the murmurs of 200 guests in the great hall below, people who have come not to offer blessings, but to witness a transaction between American money and a European title. The air in the mansion is thick with the scent of fresh flowers and the tension of financial agreements recently signed in the shadows. Your father, Robert Patterson, fought to the end to protect your fortune, but those protective terms would later become your sentence. You know that Joseph Gizicki had to grit his teeth and accept that he could not touch the principal of your trust fund, receiving only a $12,000 annual allowance on the condition that the marriage lasted. His reluctant agreement was not submission, but a dangerous, suppressed resentment. As you walk down the stairs to begin the wedding, you have no idea that you are entering a game where your opponent has already prepared the most cruel retaliations for the moment you leave American borders. The shimmering tiara on your head tonight will be the only and last piece of Medill pride you carry to a foreign land. The wedding ends in exhausting extravagance, and you are quickly swept away on a journey to Paris. At the Ritz Hotel, amidst magnificent rooms smelling of expensive champagne, Joseph's mask begins to crack. You feel a bitter sense of displacement, seeing that your husband seems to belong more to bars and casinos than to you. He takes you to places where waitstaff bow and call him by the intimate name Geezy, where bottles of hard liquor are constantly uncorked without your consultation. You try to keep up with his fluent French conversations with his faded aristocratic friends, but all you receive is arrogant dismissal. His control begins with the smallest things, like ordering which dress you must wear for dinner, and extends to seizing complete authority over every expenditure of the trip. The real shock hits in Monte Carlo, where the brilliant lights of the casino stage hide the cruelty of reality. You stand and watch your husband throw away money, the sweat, blood, and power of your grandfather into the aimless spins of roulette. In just 5 days, $6,000 vanish into thin air. When you summon the courage to speak up about such wastefulness, the space around you suddenly freezes. A devastating slap leaves your ears ringing, and the warmth of blood begins to seep from the corner of your lip. You look into the eyes of the man you married less than 3 weeks ago, and what you see is not remorse, but utter contempt. He has completely stripped away the elegance of account to reveal the nature of a tyrant. Joseph's insults from that night still echo in your mind like a dark refrain. He looks at you as if viewing an obsolete object and tells you to your face, you have no money, you have no children, you have no sense. He tells you that you are a useless wife and that you bore me to death. You realize that, in his eyes, you were never a woman to be loved, but only a bottomless wallet and a tool to maintain his decaying noble lineage. The physical pain from the slap is nothing compared to the collapse of your self-esteem. You, a daughter of the illustrious Patterson family, are now merely the prisoner of a penniless fortune hunter. The journey from Paris to the Nowosielka estate in Poland is like a train ride into hell. You look out the carriage window, seeing the landscape change from the lush green fields of France to the desolate gray lands of the Russian border. When the carriage stops before what is called a castle, your heart tightens. Instead of a brilliant palace, as Joseph described, there stands before you a massive but bedraggled building that looks like a huge, dilapidated barn. Wind whistles through window frames without curtains, and the musty smell of rooms unused for a long time surrounds you. There is no heating, no modern plumbing, and servants in tattered clothes look at you with alien eyes, speaking a language you cannot understand. The isolation at Nowosielka is a slow and ruthless form of psychological violence. You find yourself confined amidst tens of thousands of acres of wasteland, where the nearest neighbor is hundreds of miles away. Joseph quickly seizes your passport, turning you into a stateless person in your own home. He personally opens and reads every letter you send to your family, ensuring your mother in distant America only receives soulless descriptions of scenery or architecture. You learn to write lies to stay alive, learning to hide the bruises on your arms under long sleeves in the middle of summer. You realize that while the prenuptial agreement protects your assets, in this remote land, the only law is the Count's will. He begins to intercept the income from your trust fund as soon as it arrives. The $40,000 annual sum, a massive fortune, now disappears into Warsaw casinos, or to support the mistresses he brazenly brings to the estate. You, who once lived in the ultimate luxury of Chicago, now have to count every penny to pay the household servants. Every time you ask about money, you are met with lashings or unpredicted rages. You find yourself living in a state of permanent panic, listening for his footsteps on the wooden hallway to guess whether tonight will be a quiet meal or a horrific bout of abuse. Resentment begins to crystallize in your heart, replacing the initial fear. You look at Joseph, a man you describe as a sensualist, and long for an escape, whether it be his death or your own. You realize you have been a slave from the first day you met him. During long nights in the cold stone room, you lie listening to the wind howling through ancient trees, wondering how a woman who had everything could lose it all so quickly. You begin to understand that true power does not lie in bank figures, but in personal freedom, the very thing you foolishly traded for a hollow title. In 1905, when you become pregnant, the loneliness becomes more profound than ever. Your body aches, plagued by constant morning sickness amidst the bone-chilling cold of the estate. Yet Joseph looks at you as if watching an animal performing its reproductive duty. He still forces you to appear on time for meals and to manage everything, even when you have no strength. You have only a local midwife who speaks no English by your side, caring for you with ancient and crude methods. The night of labor, lasting 14 hours in a freezing room, is a life or death struggle you must face alone. The only doctor in the region called to help is a drunkard, while your husband is off enjoying himself in Vienna. The birth of the baby girl on the 3rd of September, 1905, brings you no relief, but a new fear. Joseph returns after 3 days and cannot hide his disappointment that the child is not a boy to inherit the title. He coldly imposes the name Felicia Leonora on your daughter, without consulting you. From that moment, you realize Felicia is not just your child, but a new pawn in Joseph's hand. He knows your love for the child is the only weakness he can exploit. He begins to use Felicia to threaten you, reminding you that under Russian law, he has total ownership of the child and will never let you take her out of Poland. When your brother Joseph visits that autumn, you have to employ every acting skill of an elite lady to hide the truth. You try to smile, try to say you are only tired from childbirth, but your pale gaze and exhaustion cannot deceive the brother who grew up with you. Joseph sees the truth behind these decaying castle walls. He quarrels with Joseph, a heated confrontation that ends with him being expelled from the estate. When Joseph takes your hand and says, "Write to me if you need anything," you feel a faint glimmer of hope, but it is extinguished immediately when you remember the half-opened envelopes on your husband's desk. The most painful blow does not come from your abuser, but from your own biological mother. In 1907, when Nellie came to Poland, you pour your heart out begging for help. You take her to see the library where you were once locked for days, and tell her of the beatings and humiliations you endured. You kneel at your mother's feet, begging her to use the Patterson family influence to take you and Felicia back to America. But Nellie's reaction is like a bucket of ice water poured over your bleeding soul. She looks at you with the cold eyes of someone protecting family honor rather than her own daughter. She dismisses all your pleas, claiming you are too sensitive and refuse to adapt to European culture. She makes excuses for Joseph, saying he is under financial pressure and that every marriage has its early storms. But the most painful words, the ones that sever the final bond between you and your mother were, the Patterson family did not produce scandals. You realize that in your mother's eyes, your safety and happiness are not as important as the family's face in the American newspapers. You have been abandoned by the very people who should have protected you most. Nellie's rejection awakens something primal and fierce within you. When she leaves, taking the last warmth of America with her, you no longer cry. You stand in the dark room, watching your daughter Felicia sleeping in her cradle, and vow that you will never end your life as a victim. You see Joseph beginning to vent his frustration on the baby, starting to curse Felicia with the same bitter language he used on you. That is the final boundary. You can endure wounds on your own flesh, but you will never let them touch your daughter's soul. From the end of 1907, you begin to live a secret life right under the Count's nose. You learn to be more obedient than ever, to make him lower his guard. You secretly save every penny from the market money, hiding them in cracks in the castle walls. You learn to write letters in code to your brother Joseph, detailing the full truth in your plan. You contact a lawyer in Vienna through a loyal servant, preparing identification papers and financial evidence. Every day that passes is an intense battle of wits, where a small mistake could cost you your life. You prepare for an escape, not just to reclaim freedom, but to reclaim yourself. You look out over the snow-covered fields of Poland, where winter is arriving, and know this will be the last time you let the cold of this land seep into your marrow. You are no longer the weak socialite of Chicago. You have become a woman tempered in the red fire of abuse and betrayal. You stand up, walking through the dark hallways of the castle, your hands tightly clutching the hem of your fur cloak, feeling the hardness of the will guiding your every step toward the flickering light of freedom. You step out the back door of the mansion, your breath forming plumes of white smoke in the freezing night air. You hear the wind whistling through the old oak trees, a sound that is no longer a threat, but the call of a distant world waiting. You lean down, clutching Felicia tightly to your chest under your cloak, feeling the child's heartbeat merging with your own racing heart as your leather shoes touch the fine snow, preparing for the first steps in your fateful escape across the Russian-Austrian border. Part 4. Escape to America and filing for divorce. The rhythmic murmur of the waves off the coast of Pau, France, should have brought you peace, but for you, it was merely the background score for a gathering inner storm. You stand by the window, the sea breezes chill seeping through the cracks, yet it is warmer than the resentment frozen in your chest. A fresh bruise on your arm, hidden beneath expensive lace, is a relic of the heated clash that just took place with Joseph. Looking in the mirror, you see a woman you no longer recognize. Green eyes that once sparkled are now two hollow pits of despair. You realize every moment spent lingering by this man's side is not just spiritual suicide, but a death sentence for Felicia's future. The thought of escaping him, the man who had become your master from the first day you met, becomes a burning obsession. I had a longing to get away from this man, whom I hated, and whom I wished dead or myself dead anyway, to be free of this man who had become my master from the first day I saw him. The decision to defect is made in a moment of chilling stillness. You secretly gather the remaining fragments of your life into a few small suitcases, away from the watchful eyes of servants loyal to the Count. You cradle Felicia, only 3 years old, in your arms. The child sleeps soundly, unaware that her mother is preparing a gamble with their lives. You leave the resort under the cover of darkness, your heart pounding like the rhythm of horse hooves on cobblestones. London is the first destination, a city of fog and hollow hopes. You believe that simply crossing the border into a civilized nation will protect a mother fleeing abuse. But you were too naive to think that Joseph's title of Count could be easily subdued by fragile geographic boundaries. The first 3 weeks in London are a brief lull before the deluge. You rent a small house, attempting to rebuild a peaceful world for Felicia amidst green gardens. But Joseph's ghost lurks in every foggy street corner. He is not a man to easily release his most prized asset. On a May afternoon in 1908, tragedy strikes with the speed of a lethal blade. You will never forget the image of the stranger's fur coat and goggles, deceiving the nanny in the nursery. Felicia is snatched away before the eyes of those you trusted most. Joseph's audacity and cruelty exceed all imagination. He has kidnapped his own daughter, spiriting her across borders to hide her in a remote convent in Austria, where the power of Eastern European nobility and Russian law shield him like an impenetrable wall. The news reaches you in Paris while seeking support from your parents, causing the world around you to shatter. Massive headlines strike you like public slaps. Count kidnaps baby. The pain of losing your child makes thoughts of divorce or personal freedom irrelevant. Every legal effort stalls, as you understand that in Europe at this time, a mother without her child is a woman without power. You wander through European capitals like a ghost, knocking on the doors of lavish law offices only to receive hesitant shakes of the head. In their eyes, Joseph is simply exercising his legal paternal rights, and the suffering of an American mother is but a minor detail in the ancient laws of the old continent. The Patterson family fortune, which was always omnipotent in Chicago, suddenly becomes meaningless against the stubbornness of the Russian aristocracy. You spend months hiring private detectives, chasing faint leads from Austria to St. Petersburg, but Joseph is always one step ahead. He turns Felicia into a bargaining chip, a tool for extortion and revenge. Despair gnaws at you every night as you think of your small child imprisoned within cold convent walls without a mother. You realize you are facing not just one man, but an entire system of power that has existed for centuries to protect those like him. Finally, your family is forced to resort to the ultimate weapon, the supreme political power of the United States. It is a bitter irony that your daughter's safety depends on a diplomatic letter from President William Howard Taft to Tsar Nicholas II. You stand in the shadows of diplomatic halls, awaiting the decision of men who hold the power of life and death. Under American pressure, the Tsar finally issued a decree forcing Joseph to return the child. But this victory is not free. Behind the diplomatic moves are naked financial negotiations. Your family has to pay staggering ransoms, ranging from hundreds of thousands to over $1 million, to satisfy the bottomless greed of the debt-ridden Count. You have to buy back your own biological child at the price of a fortune, a harsh reality that makes you realize even sacred bonds can be appraised in cash. In August 1909, in a Vienna hotel room, the reunion you long dreamed of finally occurs. But instead of a warm embrace, you receive a look of wariness and terror from Felicia herself. The 3-year-old, after more than a year of separation, now speaks a foreign tongue and looks at you as if you were a stranger. Your heart bleeds as you realize Joseph has not only kidnapped her body, but also stolen her memory of her mother. You hurry her onto an Atlantic crossing, fleeing Europe as if escaping a contagious disease. On the ship swaying amidst the vast sea, you hold the child tightly, promising that you will never let anyone separate the two of you again, even if the price is being shunned by the whole world. Your return to America is not a triumph, but a painful landing on the cold marble floor of your family. You hope to find sanctuary in your parents' arms, but all you receive are hesitant looks and implicit reproaches. To your parents, your safety is less important than the reputation of the Chicago Tribune. The kidnapping and your broken marriage have become a stain on the clan's luxurious mantle. In your father's office, thick with the scent of oak and tobacco, you try to present evidence of Joseph's abuse, but Robert Patterson does not even want to look at the bruises on your body. He did not ask to see bruises. He did not suggest that Joseph's behavior was unacceptable. He simply made clear that Cissy's decision to leave had created a problem, and the problem was hers to manage. Your father's coldness is like a second knife plunging into your already shattered soul. You realize you have escaped a prison in Poland only to enter another in America, a prison of elite prejudice and Gilded Age hypocrisy. You file for divorce, officially declaring war on Joseph on the legal front, and immediately become prime prey for the media. Rival newspapers miss no chance to expose every private detail of the Countess Flea's brutal nobleman. You see your name on front pages alongside allegations of abuse and a transatlantic custody battle. Women who once smiled at you at your lavish wedding now whisper about your failure as cheap entertainment at tea parties. This legal battle is not just a proceeding, it is an exhausting 8-year marathon. Joseph constantly countersues from Europe, hiring the most cunning lawyers in America to prolong the case and demand absurd alimony. Each court session reopens old wounds. Each petition is a reminder of your past mistake. You gradually transform from a naive girl into a calloused woman with claws. You learn to face public insults with an expressionless face, learning to use your power to strike back at those who wish to pull you into the mud. The period of 1908-1909 stripped away the final fragments of your innocence, but it also gave you a new weapon, the hardness of someone with nothing left to lose. You look back at the path traveled and see that the radiant debutante has died, giving way to a woman willing to use any means to protect her motherhood and freedom. You walk the streets of Washington, D.C., under the yellow lights of late afternoons, feeling your loneliness to be more brilliant and sharp than any diamond you ever owned. You know this battle is only beginning, and you will never bow to anyone again, be it a tyrannical husband or an indifferent father. You step onto the steps of the newspaper headquarters, the chill of the brass doorknob seeping into your palm through silk gloves. You hear the printing presses in the distance vibrating a pulse of power you begin to recognize as the only thing that can protect you. You enter the Great Hall, your leather shoes clicking decisively on the floor, heading toward your brother Joseph's office, where stacks of legal files wait to open a counterattack more devastating than ever. Part 5. Painfully losing custody of her daughter to her husband. The chill from the thick legal files seeps through your silk gloves, reminding you of a war you thought you had won. In 1909, When the judge in America granted you custody and a formal divorce, you took a deep breath, believing the shadow of Joseph Gizicki had permanently receded into the past. You held Felicia close, feeling her small heartbeat and promising her a peaceful future on American soil. But you were too naive regarding the tangled web of international law, where national borders become walls that block justice. You had no idea that across the ocean, Joseph was using his title as a count and the protection of the Russian Empire to weave a new trap, more ruthless and sophisticated than any lashing he had ever dealt you. All illusions of safety vanished on a March afternoon in 1910 when the door of the Patterson Mansion in Washington, D.C. was met with a decisive knock. You stood at the top of the stairs, looking down into the grand hall to see the silhouette of the man you hoped never to see again. Joseph appeared like a ghost from the past, showing no sign of defeat. Instead, he carried a terrifying arrogance. Beside him stood a lawyer with an order from a Polish court, brazenly demanding that you return Felicia. You felt the ground beneath your feet tremble. His presence in the heart of the American capital was a direct declaration of war, turning your home into a new legal battlefield. You found yourself dragged into endless debates over jurisdiction, where life and motherhood were dissected by men in black robes who viewed your daughter merely as an object of status dispute. The long days in court wore your spirit down like a string stretched too tight. Every morning you woke up, you saw Felicia playing, and your heart tightened at the thought that the child could be snatched away at any moment. Helplessness enveloped you as you realized that even in America, Joseph's power slithered through complex diplomatic channels. You hired more lawyers, poured more money into stacks of petitions, but the answer from justice remained as murky as the fog on the Potomac River. Felicia, only 3 years old then, would sometimes look at you with wide eyes and ask about her father. You could only remain silent, swallowing bitter tears. For how could you explain to a child that her father was the nightmare lurking outside the window? In a desperate effort to find some peace for her, you decided to take Felicia to the Berkshires in August 1910. You hoped the fresh air and the stillness of the forest would shield you both from the suffocating pressure of the city. You had subjectively believed that remoteness would be a safety shield. But that very silence became an accomplice to tragedy. One afternoon, you left the room to handle a few letters, leaving Felicia with the nanny you trusted most. When you returned, the space was terrifyingly quiet. The nanny stood there, her face bloodless, her lips trembling and unable to speak. Felicia was gone. The small chair she often sat in was now empty, with only her doll lying abandoned on the floor. Joseph's plan was terrifyingly ruthless and precise. He had waited like a predator, knowing your every habit. He deceived the nanny with cunning words and took Felicia right out from under your nose. By the time you managed to alert the police and send an urgent telegram to the State Department, Joseph and your daughter were already settled on an express train heading toward the sea. You frantically rushed to the station, but all that remained was the faint gray smoke of a train long gone. A sense of horror washed over you, a pain tearing through your chest that words cannot describe. You realized that American law, though on your side, was completely powerless once the child stepped onto a foreign-flagged vessel under the protection of a man with a count's title. Without a second's hesitation, you booked a ticket on the fastest ocean liner to pursue him. You crossed the Atlantic with a bleeding heart and a mind filled with the worst imagery. But when you set foot on the old continent, Joseph had already hidden Felicia deep within Russia in St. Petersburg, a place where all American diplomatic pressure became meaningless before the Tsar's protection. You found yourself a desperate mother, wandering through European capitals in the bone-chilling cold of winter. Moving from Austria to Russia, from luxury hotels to dark detective offices, you were always one step behind him. In every city you reached, your daughter's trail had just faded, leaving only the faint warmth of rumors. You exhausted the family's massive fortune on these hopeless searches. You bribed border officials, hired the best detectives, and used every connection of the Chicago Tribune to apply pressure. But in Europe, you realized a bitter truth. Joseph's title carried a weight that American dollars could not buy. He was part of the system, an aristocrat protected by feudal laws that never valued a woman's rights. You were trapped in a labyrinth of hollow promises and non-stop trains, finding yourself skeletal, your green eyes holding only the emptiness of one who has lost her soul. By 1911, with your strength spent, you received an offer from Joseph through a lawyer. It was not a reconciliation, but a life sentence for your motherhood. He allowed you to see Felicia again, but the price was total surrender. You had to permanently renounce legal custody. You had to sign a document confirming Joseph as the sole guardian and accept that your daughter's home was in Europe under his management. You were only allowed to visit her for a few weeks each year, under strict supervision and at a location designated by him. You stood before that paper, hands trembling, feeling the humiliation seep into your very bones. But you had no other choice. She signed the agreement. She had no choice. The alternative was never seeing Felicia again. To see your child smile once more, you were willing to sign the agreement that stripped away your very self. The subsequent reunion in Poland did not bring the comfort you expected. Felicia, now 6 years old, looked at you with the eyes of a stranger. The child who once clung to her mother now spoke Polish fluently and only babbled a few words of broken English. Language became a barrier, but the distance in her soul was what pained you most. You realized Joseph had silently poisoned the little girl's mind with distorted stories about her mother. She had been told things about Cissy, lies probably, or distortions that made her weary and distant. Felicia looked at the expensive gifts you brought with indifference, maintaining a polite but cold distance. The child you had carried was now completely a part of the world of the man who had ruined your life. Every visit thereafter became a psychological execution. You tried to hug her, but that small body went stiff. You tried to tell her about memories in America, but she only looked at you with suspicion, as if looking at a liar. The most painful betrayal did not come from Joseph, but from the estrangement of the child you loved most. You bitterly realized that no matter how many lawsuits you won, you had lost your daughter's heart to your enemy. The separation was no longer on legal papers. It had eaten into Felicia's subconscious, turning you into a strange and guilty woman in her life. In 1912, you returned to Washington, D.C., with a shattered and completely empty soul. The divorce was officially finalized, but you walked out of court empty-handed. You had lost love, honor, a great fortune, and most importantly, you had lost your only child. The divorce was finalized under terms that gave Joseph everything. She had lost her daughter. You returned to America expecting sympathy, but all you received was the cruelty of the Gilded Age elite. People who once raised glasses to toast you now whispered about the failure of the Countess. In their eyes, a mother who could not keep her child was a woman with deep moral flaws. Your story became cheap entertainment for frivolous tea parties. Even within the Patterson family, The warmth was gone. Your mother, Eleanor, looked at you with the cold eyes of disappointment. She made no secret of her view that all these tragedies stemmed from your impulsiveness and lack of thought. Eleanor made it clear that Cissy had brought this on herself. Your father, Robert, completely ignored Felicia's existence, forbidding the name from being mentioned in the house as if erasing a stain from the family history. You found yourself isolated in the very home where you were born. The world that was once vibrantly colored was now only two gray tones of shame and loneliness. You moved out to live alone in a small apartment in Washington, imprisoning yourself within four walls to avoid the judgmental eyes of society. You declined most social invitations, finding the bustle outside only deepened the pain within. She lived in her apartment in Washington, declined most social invitations, and drank more than she should have. Alcohol became the only friend that helped numb the sharp stabs in your heart every time you thought of Felicia. You looked in the mirror and saw an invisible woman, a shadow of yourself, sinking into the darkness of despair. The period of 1910, 1913 ended in a somber stillness, a lull of clinical death before you were forced to find some way to be reborn from the ashes of your life. You step out onto the apartment balcony, the chill of the Washington night wind brushing against your tired face. You look toward the horizon where the city lights are fading, feeling the bitter taste of the remaining wine on your lips. You place your hand on the cold stone ledge, your feet unconsciously stepping back into the darkness of the room, preparing for a dreamless sleep where memories of Felicia and failure will be temporarily buried under the fog of time before a new destiny begins to knock. Part 6. Meeting the second husband and inheriting wealth. The residual taste of red wine still lingers faintly on your tongue as you stand amidst the brilliantly lit living room of a dinner party at Lake Forest in 1914. The laughter around you, the clinking of crystal, everything suddenly becomes distant, as if you are observing the world through an opaque pane of glass. In your early 30s, after the horrific storms of your first marriage, you realize you had become invisible in your own life, a supporting character in a story you could not remember agreeing to. The brilliance of the Countess of old is now merely a weary shell, concealing a soul longing for an anchor, or at least a stillness that does not carry the scent of violence. It is in this moment of emptiness that Elmer Schlesinger appears. He does not carry the deadly charm or the extravagant aristocratic air of Joseph Gizicki. At 43, Elmer is the embodiment of practical and solid American success. A renowned corporate lawyer, he spends his days specializing in corporate law, representing railroads and meatpacking companies in disputes with unions and regulators. When he looks at you, his eyes hold not brutal possession, but a calm understanding. He was stable where Joseph had been volatile. He was American, practical, and uninterested in drama. Elmer's courtship of you is much like how he handles an important contract. Careful, meticulous, and with no room for emotional errors. He knows well the scars you carry on your flesh and in your soul, knows of your daughter Felicia growing up in estrangement, yet he does not judge. He did not promise passion, he promised partnership. You accept his presence, like a traveler finding a sturdy shelter after a storm. This relationship lasts in tranquility for many years, a necessary pause for you to gather your own fragments before officially entering your second marriage in 1925. However, Elmer's stillness seems insufficient to quench the fire of rebellion always smoldering in the veins of the Medill clan. The Washington elite, with their suffocating unwritten rules, begin to make you feel restless. In 1916, you find a dangerous escape in the arms of Nicholas Longworth, a powerful congressman from Ohio. The irony lies in the fact that Nicholas is the husband of Alice Roosevelt Longworth, the daughter of former President Theodore Roosevelt, and the most powerful, sharp-witted woman in the Capitol. The affair was not passionate so much as available a mutual arrangement between two people who had discovered that our marriages were performances that exhausted us. Those stealthy afternoons in luxury hotel rooms bring you a sense of being alive, but the price is the collapse of your final social connections. When rumors reach Alice Roosevelt, she responds with a cold, ruthless pride, sharper than any insult. She begins cutting you at every social event, ignoring your existence as if you were air for 3 consecutive years. Alice's contempt is not just a personal punishment, it is your expulsion from Washington's elite circle. This animosity plants a seed of revenge in your heart, a silent promise that one day you will hold a weapon that even people like Alice Roosevelt must fear. The feeling of abandonment and the suffocation of judgmental stares push you to a bold decision in the summer of 1916. You leave behind silk dresses and tea parties for Jackson Hole, Wyoming, a land of snow-capped peaks and roaring rivers. Here, you completely transform. You shed the image of a refined heiress to don the attire of a true Westerner, a man's shirt, boots, breeches, and a 5-gallon hat. You feel the weight of the hunting rifle on your shoulder and the pungent scent of pine resin replacing French perfume. You purchase the vast Flat Creek Ranch from cowboy and former rustler Cal Carrington. Amidst the vastness of the West, for the first time, you feel the true definition of freedom. A freedom that cannot be bought with money, but can be found in the wildness of nature. Your adventurous spirit reaches its peak in 1921, when you stand before the rapids of the Salmon River, known as the River of No Return. You are the first woman to challenge its fierce waves, feeling the cold spray on your face and the ultimate thrill of mastering the current. It is in the solitude of the mountains and forests that you begin to find your voice again. The desire to write, to record these experiences rises strongly. In 1920, you convince your brother Joseph to let you write for the New York Daily News. You published a series of hunting articles in 1920 from the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho. These are not just ordinary articles. They are the first steps of a queen preparing to reclaim her family's media throne. But while you find freedom for yourself, you lose the final link to your daughter. The bitterest irony of your life is that you spent a fortune and immense effort to win Felicia back from Joseph, only to ultimately fail completely in the role of a mother. She was primarily raised by nannies and servants in your Washington, D.C. household, reflecting your preoccupation with socialite pursuits, journalism, and personal travels, rather than active parenting. Your presence in her life consists only of brief intervals between trips, making the child feel like a precious piece of furniture that is not loved. When Felicia is sent to boarding school, the letters exchanged between mother and daughter become heartbreakingly formal. Your daughter writes that she was doing well in her classes. She had joined the writing club, filling pages with information that required no emotional response. You realize Felicia has learned to build a wall around herself, a defense mechanism you once used to cope with your own mother's coldness years ago. In 1923, in a desperate attempt to mend the fractured relationship, You redecorate a bedroom in Washington and invite Felicia to visit. I wanted Felicia to see that she had been wrong about her mother, that I was not the villain Joseph had described. But that visit became a tragedy of silence and conflict. Felicia withdraws, becoming invisible whenever any argument occurs, a manifestation of deep childhood psychological trauma that you can never compensate for. Your efforts only make her want to flee further from the Patterson family's suffocating control. The final rupture comes in 1924, during a horrific quarrel that shatters all limits of elite decorum. It was a knockdown, drag-out fight, which included hair pulling and clothing tearing. In that moment, you see in Felicia your own rebellion, and Felicia sees in you the ruthless imposition of Grandmother Nellie. Felicia, 18 years old, leaves home, working as a waitress and living in a rooming house. When journalist Drew Pearson finds her and convinces her to marry as a legal escape, you know you have permanently lost your maternal authority. Pearson's promise of a 3-year trial marriage to Felicia marks the end of all your efforts to control your daughter's life. Amidst those emotional ruins, your financial power is consolidated more firmly than ever. On the 17th of March, 1923, your mother officially transferred the mansion at 15 DuPont Circle to you in consideration of love and affection. This palace of dozens of luxurious rooms becomes your private domain, where you begin hosting magnificent parties to reassert your position in Washington. However, the vastness of the mansion only highlights the emptiness in your soul. You walk through long hallways, looking at portraits of ancestors, and realize that money can build a fortress, but cannot create a home. In a moment of nostalgia, and perhaps regret, you draft a will in 1924, naming Felicia your beloved daughter and designating her as the sole heir. Though the relationship between you has hit rock bottom, that will is the final blood bond you try to hold on to. You stand on the balcony of DuPont Circle, looking down at the light-shimmering square, feeling the weight of the massive fortune pressing on your shoulders. You know a new chapter of life is opening, where you will no longer be a weak mother or wife, but a media queen preparing to ascend her own throne. The chill of the Washington night drifts through the silk curtains as you walk back to your desk, where the latest copies of the New York Daily News still smell strongly of printer's ink. You run your fingers over the words, feeling the vibration of power flowing through your veins, replacing the pain of lost relationships. You turn off the desk lamp, letting darkness envelop the vast room, your feet stepping lightly toward the window overlooking the square, where carriages and new model cars glide by, preparing for a journey into the heart of American press power waiting ahead. Part 7. Beginning as editor of the Washington Herald. The chill of the ivory satin silk touches your skin on the morning of the 11th of April, 1925, bringing a sensation entirely different from the first time you wore a wedding dress. There is no longer the suffocating nervousness, no more illusions of a brilliantly colored aristocratic love. You stand before the mirror at 43, looking at a woman who has traversed enough inner storms to know that stillness is sometimes more precious than any fire of passion. Elmer Schlesinger stands there, calm and solid as a cliff. He did not promise passion, he promised partnership. To one who has learned the bitter lesson that passion often pairs with cruelty and pain, that promise sounds reasonable, a peaceful harbor after years adrift on a violent sea. Your second marriage begins with a cold calculation of logic. Elmer is an illustrious corporate lawyer. holding the secrets of major conglomerates, and possessing a respectable, independent fortune. The combination of Medill blood and Schlesinger status creates a financial empire worth millions. Yet behind those staggering figures lies a vast void that cannot be filled. You and Elmer live in a lavish apartment on Fifth Avenue in New York, moving between mansions and magnificent private train cars, but your trajectories rarely intersect. You realize you are living in a perfect glass house, where everything is polished but lacks the warmth of true connection. You sleep in 2 separate rooms, an arrangement common among the elite, yet it feels like a silent admission of an internal cooling. Every evening, Elmer returns home at 6 o'clock, carrying the scent of dry contracts and complex corporate law. You sit across from him at dinner, listening to stories of lawsuits or union disputes, but your mind drifts to the wild fields of Wyoming or the ink-scented newsrooms of your brother Joseph. They moved through the house on parallel tracks, occupying the same space without intersecting. The stability you once craved now becomes a comfortable sort of prison, where boredom gnaws at you day by day, turning you into a perfect but soulless hostess in the eyes of society. Your loneliness is deepened by the ruthless estrangement from your only child. In 1925, when Felicia decides to marry journalist Drew Pearson, you only receive the news through a cold letter arriving a mere 3 weeks before the ceremony. Your daughter does not invite you to the wedding, citing the difficulty of European travel, but you know well that it is a punishment. She sat with that letter for a long time. You send her expensive silverware engraved with her saint's name, a final effort to grasp a rotten bond. But the thank you note you receive is polite, empty, and alien. Bitterly, her daughter had decided that the man who kidnapped her was family, and the woman who gave birth to her was not. To flee from that rejection, you transform the mansion at 15 DuPont Circle in Washington into the epicenter of the American elite. The house, designed by the great architect Stanford White, with rosewood floors and magnificent ballrooms, becomes the stage for your social power. In 1927, while the White House undergoes repairs, you host President Calvin Coolidge and his wife. You stand there, amidst shimmering crystal lights, smiling to welcome the most powerful people in the country, including the hero Charles Lindbergh after his historic transatlantic flight. Thousands surround your mansion, cheers echoing across the square, but inside, you feel like a hostess, merely playing a professional role. People come, praise the food, enjoy your extravagance, and then leave without a thought for how empty the woman behind all that splendor feels. It is within that emptiness that the instinct of a Medill woman urges you to take up the pen. You cannot find meaning in useless tea parties, so you decide to expose them. Using the pseudonym Eleanor Gizicka, you wrote your debut novel titled Glass Houses. It is a witty yet ruthless revenge on Washington society. You transform real figures from powerful senators to former lovers, and even the best friend who betrayed you into satirical caricatures under your sharp pen. You write to prove you are not just an ornament, that you possess a keen intellect that can see through the hypocrisy behind glamorous facades. In 1928, after receiving news of your ex-husband Joseph's death in Vienna, you publish your second novel, Fall Flight. The book is a painful, fictionalized narrative of your years in Russia and the horrific marriage you endured. Writing is not just a psychological release, it is a training process for your future journalistic mindset. You learn to observe the smallest details, how to use words as weapons, and the courage to expose the truth, no matter how cruel it may be. You are unconsciously preparing for a new journey where you will no longer be an observer from the sidelines, but the driver of the news cycle. The sudden event of February 1929 strips away your final layer of stable cover. Elmer Schlesinger dies of a heart attack right on the golf course, leaving you in a freedom you were not yet prepared to receive. The 4-year marriage ends abruptly, and you immediately change your name back to Eleanor Medill Patterson, a way to reassert your primal identity. At 48, you stand amidst a massive fortune, but with no clear purpose in life. You fall into a prolonged depression, sleeping until noon and refusing all social invitations. The once brilliant DuPont Circle mansion sinks into darkness because you do not bother to open the curtains. Her life had largely been a world of self-indulged impulses. Another trip, another house, another lover. You are rotting in your own wealth, like a spider dying in the billion-dollar web it wove. Salvation comes from your cold and pragmatic mother, Nellie Medill. In December 1929, she visits and is horrified to find her daughter withering among dusty furniture. She stands in the living room, pulling back the heavy silk curtains to let the winter light flood in, and speaks words like lashes to awaken your survival instinct. You're rotting. You look terrible. You're wasting yourself. When you weakly reply that you are only resting, she bluntly declares, "You're disappearing. You need work. You need purpose." Sitting in this house feeling sorry for yourself is not a life. It was Nellie who planted in your head the crazy but fateful idea. Acquire the Washington Herald, a heavily losing newspaper belonging to tycoon William Randolph Hearst. When you hesitated, saying you knew nothing about running a paper, she replied with the signature coldness of the Klan. "You'll learn, or you'll fail. Either way, you'll stop dying in this house." That sentence was like a thunderclap in a silent sky, awakening the media monster sleeping in your subconscious. You realize the blood in your veins is not meant for tea parties, but for printer's ink, newsprint, and fierce media wars. Through your close friend Arthur Brisbane, you approach Hearst. At the time, the Washington Herald was a bottom-tier paper, ranking 5th out of 6 competitors in the capital, and burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Hearst needed a change, and you, with your massive fortune and deep social connections, were exactly what he needed. He appoints you editor-in-chief with a symbolic salary of $10,000 a year. The Patterson family thinks you have lost your mind. Your brother Joseph predicts you will fail miserably, but they do not know you carry a ruthlessness and decisiveness tempered by past agony. On the 1st of August 1930, you walk into the newsroom on 13th Street in a luxurious fur coat, radiating the scent of wealth amidst male editors who look at you with contempt. They assume you are just a socialite playing at journalism for amusement, but they were wrong. You quickly demonstrate your absolute power on the very first day. When a condescending editor refuses to put your article on the front page, you let him finish speaking and then coldly ask him to clear his desk. You did not come here to ask for permission. You came here to rule. Under your hand, the Herald undergoes a spectacular transformation. You bring observation skills from fiction to the pages, creating gossip columns about the private lives of politicians, something readers crave, but no one dared to do. You personally redesigned the front page, turning it into a sensational and scandalous feature called Page 3. You are the first to telegram fashion news directly from Paris, making the paper an indispensable mental staple for Washington women. You fire the dissenters and replace them with a powerful team of female reporters, turning the newsroom into what Time magazine mockingly called Cissy's henhouse. You do not fear litigation. You name the powerful. And in the very first issue, readership jumps by 3,000. From a paper on the brink of bankruptcy, you have raised the Herald forcefully, becoming the first female editor-in-chief to manage a major daily in an American metropolis. You have found your life's purpose amidst the spinning of the printing presses, where your power no longer depends on any man. You stand by your office window, looking down at the streets of Washington as the city lights begin to shimmer at twilight. The pungent smell of printer's ink is heavy in the air, a scent you now find more seductive than any expensive perfume. You pick up your fur coat draped over the chair, your hands lightly skimming the recently approved drafts, and walk toward the door. Your heels click decisively on the wooden floor, heading toward the stairs where delivery trucks wait to carry your words across the Capitol, preparing for a whole new conquest of power in the dark of Washington politics. Part 8. Buying the newspaper and manipulating Washington power. The deep, muffled vibration of the massive printing presses in the newsroom basement travels through your thin leather soles, running up your spine like a current of new life. It is the summer of 1930, as you turn 48, an age when many women of your class have chosen to retire to quiet tea gardens. But you are different. William Randolph Hearst's offer for the position of editor-in-chief of the Washington Herald is not just a job. It is a lifesaver thrown into the middle of your decaying life. With a salary of $10,000 a year, a symbolic figure compared to the vast fortune you already possess, you embark on a game where the loser is crushed by sensational headlines. You enter the newsroom not as a daughter of the Medill house, but as a queen reclaiming her territory. On the 1st of August 1930, you officially take over the Herald, a newspaper gasping for air in 5th place within the Capitol's market. Experienced male editors, thick with the smell of cheap tobacco and self-importance, look at you with mockery. They expect a boss who only knows embassy parties and will soon tire of dry advertising statistics. But you astonish them by being the first to arrive each morning and the last to leave as the city lights come on. You flip through every draft, asking sharp questions about the distribution system and demanding the highest standards in the art of printing. You quickly realize that in the world of ink and newsprint, respect is not granted. It must be seized through ruthlessness. The first purge is as swift and cold as a blade, cutting through white paper. A veteran editor ignores your request to put a story on the front page, explaining with a patronizing tone that you understand nothing of professional journalism. You stand there, listening to his condescension with a terrifying patience. When he finishes, you simply drop a cold order for him to clear his desk immediately. The entire newsroom suddenly falls silent. The sound of typewriters ceases for a moment as they realize the woman in the expensive fur coat does not care about being liked. You only care about being absolutely obeyed. You understand that old-fashioned reverence will not save a losing paper, so you decide to weaponize gossip. You transform the dry social column into a vibrant and venomous gossip corner right on the front page. You expose the darkest secrets of the Washington elite, from drunken officials to the secret apartments of mistresses. Every line you write is an arrow aimed at the hypocrisy of the upper class. The first issue under your management brings 6 threats of litigation, but simultaneously it draws in 3,000 new readers. You smile, seeing aristocratic women trembling with fear yet unable to stop reading your paper every morning. You specifically target women, readers traditionally ignored by mainstream newspapers. You are a pioneer in cabling fashion news directly from Paris, turning the Herald into the most fashionable magazine in the capital. You hire a massive team of female reporters, creating a newsroom that Time magazine mockingly calls Cissy's Henhouse. You ignore the mockery because you know your hens have the ability to peck at corners that male reporters would never touch. You turn the newspaper into a living, colorful, and sometimes scandalous entity. But above all, it is a paper that no one can ignore. Despite owning millions, you are not afraid to get your hands dirty to find the truth. In 1931, you cause a sensation by personally ringing the doorbell of mobster Al Capone's villa in Miami Beach unannounced, bringing back an exclusive interview that stuns all of America. As the Great Depression blankets the country, you shed your silks and velvets to disguise yourself as Maud Martin, a destitute woman sleeping for 3 nights at the Salvation Army headquarters. You feel the cold of the floor, the smell of despair, and the blandness of relief soup, then write moving articles about the plight of the unemployed. You use the paper to demand hot lunches for children and fight for District of Columbia home rule, turning yourself into a hero for the common people while still living in a palace. Media power also becomes a tool for you to execute sharp personal revenge. The first victim is Alice Roosevelt Longworth. You have not forgotten the boycott she once subjected you to years ago. Now, you use the press pages to needle Alice, hinting that her golden age has passed and she is merely a shadow leaning on her late father's reputation. The comic strip war with Eugene Meyer of the Washington Post also becomes a legend of your ruthlessness. To vent your anger at your rival, you have your driver deliver a pound of raw meat to him with a sarcastic note, so as not to disappoint you, a cruel allusion to the character Shylock, who demands a debt in human flesh. You might admit it was a mistake later, but at that moment, the exhilaration of power is a poison you cannot refuse. Even family members are not outside your sights if they dare block your path. You terminate the contract and attack Drew Pearson, your former son-in-law and a renowned investigative journalist, simply because his articles begin to favor the Roosevelt administration too much. You call him a muckraker on your own editorial pages. Your ruthlessness does not distinguish between friend or foe. In your world of journalism, only absolute loyalty to your viewpoint is a ticket to survival. You have turned the Herald into an extension of the same iron will you inherited from your grandfather, Medill. While millions of Americans wait in soup lines, your life at 15 DuPont Circle continues as if in a parallel world. You spend a fortune renovating the 60-room mansion with Italian marble and precious wood imported from Europe. 7-course dinners with flowing champagne still take place regularly under magnificent crystal lights, where senators and diplomats gather. You also purchase and restore Mount Airy, a 17th century estate, turning it into a lavish retreat with stables and orchid greenhouses. When your brother Joseph advises you to temper your extravagant lifestyle amidst hard times, you simply brush it off with a cold arrogance. You believe you have the right to enjoy what you own, regardless of the social outrage surrounding your iron gates. Politically, you begin a distinct shift toward conservatism. The Medill blood in you does not accept the expansion of federal power under Roosevelt. Although your paper still reports on the misery of unemployment, on the editorial pages, you never stop attacking the New Deal. You view the government's Economic Recovery Acts as barriers stifling free enterprise. You turn the Herald into a fortress of resistance against the administration, a powerful conservative voice at the very center of political power. The circulation surge to 120,000 copies a day in 1936 is proof that you have captured the skeptical sentiment of a segment of the American public. In 1936, you were honored with an invitation to join the American Society of Newspaper Editors, a formal recognition of your status as the Press Queen. You have proven to the world that a rejected and abused woman can rise and seize an entire media empire. But behind that glory, loneliness still slithers through the vast hallways of DuPont Circle. You hold power in your hands, but you also realize that every war you win creates another crack in human relationships. You are the most powerful woman in Washington, but also a woman living in a fortress of suspicion and pride that is never satisfied. The darkness of a winter afternoon blankets DuPont Circle as you stand by the window, looking down at the Capitol's bustling traffic. You hold a fresh newspaper, the ink scent still pungent, feeling the sharpness of the headlines you set yourself. You wrap your fur coat around you, your hands lightly tightening the belt, and walk out of the room filled with shadows toward the waiting cars. The car doors slam shut like a definitive mark at the end of a long workday, preparing to take you on a new journey through the light-shimmering streets, where Washington's new political intrigues are beginning to spark in the night. Part 9. Holding the Times-Herald and the Anti-War Campaign. The pungent scent of printer's ink blending with the smell of fresh paper creates an addictive fragrance, soaking into every fiber of your expensive fur cloak. You stand in the newsroom on a late afternoon in 1937, feeling the steady vibration beneath your feet, the heartbeat of a rising empire. William Randolph Hearst, a titan of old, is now collapsing under the weight of massive debts from his extravagant lifestyle and the bottomless Hearst Castle. You see your opportunity in another's decline. With a faint smile, you sign a $1 million check as a loan for Hearst, an act that is both a rescue and a cunning move for a takeover. Power is not just something you inherit. It is something you use wealth to buy back, turning it into a weapon sharper than ever. The 28th of January, 1939, marks the moment you officially ascend to the sole throne of the Capitol's media. You exercise the option to buy both the Washington Herald and the Washington Times. Then, with a bold decision that leaves the American press breathless, you merge them into a single entity, the Washington Times-Herald. This is no longer an ordinary newspaper. It is a news machine, operating restlessly around the clock, publishing up to 10 editions a day to provide news from the first light of dawn until the sun sets. You are the first to arrive at the newsroom and the last to leave, managing every minute detail with a devotion bordering on tyrannical. You know that in this city of political intrigue, whoever holds the fastest and most sensational information rules the public mind. Under your shaping hands, the Times-Herald becomes the most read publication in Washington, D.C. by 1943, generating millions of dollars in annual profit. You hire the sharpest female pens, turning social columns into exposures of political secrets, and never hesitate to confront any rival. Power is now a currency you spend lavishly. The newspaper is like an extension of your will, a kingdom where you can crown or dethrone anyone with a single headline. But that brilliant success is proportional to the growing isolation in your soul, turning you into a queen, standing at the peak of fame without a single sincere friend by your side. The shift in your political stance occurs like a sudden storm. Once a fervent supporter of Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal, you abruptly pivot 180 degrees upon realizing the expansion of federal power threatens the conservative values the Medill clan has long defended. You begin using the Times-Herald as a fortress to attack the Roosevelt administration. Your editorials become poisoned arrows aimed at the president, accusing him of destroying the American spirit of self-reliance and turning the country into a dictatorial state. This hostility is no longer mere political debate. It has become a bitter personal war from which you never intend to retreat. You spare no one in the political world whom you consider an enemy. Eleanor Roosevelt, once a close friend, now becomes the target of sharp sarcasm in your pages. You call politician Claire Booth Luce, that lovely asp, and mock Vice President Henry Wallace as a crystal-gazing crackpot. Every word you choose is polished to cause maximum hurt. Even with media rival Eugene Meyer, you maintain your ruthlessness, sending him a pound of raw meat with a derogatory note after a lost lawsuit over comic strip copyrights. You believe fear is more precious than love, and you take satisfaction in seeing the entire Capitol hold its breath whenever your paper comes out. As the shadow of World War II begins to blanket Europe, you turn yourself into the strongest voice of isolationism. Haunted by horrific memories of loss in World War I, you believe America should not intervene in European family quarrels. You turn the Times-Herald into a propaganda machine for neutrality, praising Charles Lindbergh and vehemently opposing Roosevelt's Lend-Lease Act. You view it as a stealthy plot to lure American boys to their deaths without the nation's consent. Your stubbornness and intense belief in isolationism push you into a dangerous opposition against the tide of the era, yet you take pride in your independence. The climax of the confrontation takes place on the 4th of December 1941, when you and your cousin Robert McCormick decide to publish top-secret details of the U.S. military's Rainbow Five war plan. It is an act that shocks the entire nation, revealing a massive invasion plan against Germany and Japan. You want to expose the administration's lies, proving the president is secretly preparing for a war he promised to avoid. 3 days later, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, you stood by the window looking toward the White House with extreme suspicion, hinting that this tragedy might have been orchestrated to silence anti-war voices like yours. After Pearl Harbor, although the Times-Herald is forced to turn towards supporting the national war effort, the hostility between you and Roosevelt does not diminish. In the summer of 1942, you caused another shock by publishing information revealing that the U.S. Navy had cracked Japanese codes shortly after the Battle of Midway. This event infuriates Roosevelt to the point of wanting to prosecute you and the paper for espionage and treason. You stand in the eye of the storm of accusations, labeled the McCormick-Patterson Axis, and called one of the three furies of isolationism. A bomb was even thrown at the newspaper building. Yet you remain undeterred. You believe you are defending the Constitution and freedom of speech against government tyranny. Despite standing at the peak of media power, you become a tyrant in your own kingdom. You micromanage every column, fire editors on whims, and use the paper to destroy anyone in your way. You fight for hot school lunches and home rule. Yet simultaneously sow fear among your subordinates. Absolute power has turned you into a woman who can trust no one. You live in the massive 60-room mansion at DuPont Circle, yet every room seems to hold the ghosts of suspicion. You believe friends, servants, and even FBI agents are watching you, leading you to always keep a pistol by your bed and carry it in your purse, even when walking in the garden. The most painful rift is the total estrangement from your daughter Felicia. Your conservative political stance and your ruthlessness have pushed the mother-daughter relationship into an abyss. You use the paper to attack Drew Pearson, Felicia's ex-husband, making your daughter feel publicly humiliated. Childhood trauma, blending with current ideological conflict, creates an insurmountable wall. In 1945, Felicia issued a shocking statement publicly, divorcing you, saying she was tired of being Cissy's daughter. You realize you won the custody battle years ago in court, but lost everything in the battle for your only child's heart. Your health begins to collapse under the weight of alcoholism and deepening paranoia. You immerse yourself in hard liquor to forget the emptiness in the overly large house, where your footsteps echo back as a reminder of loneliness. You constantly change your will, striking names and adding others based on imaginary friction born of drunken states. You are the most powerful woman in Washington, but you cannot find a peaceful sleep without a gun under your pillow. The Times-Herald empire is as magnificent as your internal world is rusted and decaying. You stand on the balcony of DuPont Circle on a freezing winter night, watching the Washington lights fade under the fog. You hold the latest print of the morning paper, feeling the sharpness of the anti-government lines, yet your hands tremble uncontrollably. You step inside, pulling the heavy velvet curtain shut to separate yourself from the outside world, then silently walk toward the desk, cluttered with liquor bottles and prescriptions. You place your hand on the rough leather holster, feeling the chill of the metal through your palm as you slowly sit in the massive armchair, preparing for a long night, facing the ghosts of power surrounding you in the shadows of the lonely mansion. Part 10. Living in Solitude, Drowning in Alcohol, and Philanthropy. The telephone in your bedroom rings, like a knife cutting through the stillness of a 1946 morning. You pick up, and from the other end, news of the sudden death of your brother Joseph Medill Patterson hits like an earthquake, shattering the final fragments of your soul. Joe the brother, the comrade on the journalistic front, and the only remaining link to your magnificent childhood in Chicago, is gone after a heart attack. You stand in the vast room of the DuPont Circle mansion, feeling the air around you suddenly thin out, as if the oxygen is being depleted. At his funeral in Chicago, amidst the scent of thousands of lilies, you find yourself crying not just for Joe, but for your own ultimate solitude. You realize you are the last one left of a proud Medill generation, the keeper of a family's treasury of memories that now has no one left to share it with. Joe's departure turns your mansions from fortresses of power into empty tombs. You withdraw into the 60-room estate, where your own footsteps echo back as a taunt. You move between DuPont Circle, Dower House in Maryland, and the remote ranch in Wyoming like a spirit searching for a place without the ghosts of the past. Yet no matter where you are, loneliness haunts you like a fog that never clears. You begin to shun society, refusing calls and social invitations, seeing the outside world only as a frivolous stage where you no longer wish to play the lead. Every afternoon, as the sun fades behind the buildings of Washington, you find yourself sitting alone in the library, with only darkness and memories for company. Your physical body begins to manifest the exhaustion your soul has carried for so long. The addiction to scotch is no longer a mere diversion. It has become the sole organizing principle of your day. You drink to numb the pain, drink to dispel the silence, and drink because it is the only thing you can completely control. The pungent smell of the amber liquid becomes your breath, soaking into every velvet fiber of your armchair. One morning in January 1946, right in the office of the Times-Herald, you collapse as your left arm goes completely numb. It is a minor stroke, a cold warning from a body that has been excessively abused, yet you dismiss the doctor's advice with an instinctive stubbornness. You believe you can use your will to master death, just as you used money to master your rivals. Chronic pain from falls on the stairs leads you to seek the dangerous relief of painkillers and sedatives. You begin mixing scotch with sleeping pills in a desperate effort to find a dreamless sleep. In April 1947, when you are found unconscious amidst empty pill bottles, the medical community tries to call it an accidental overdose and medication mismanagement. But deep down, everyone understands it is a cry for help from a soul too weary of its own existence. Your skin becomes as gray as ash. Your steps on the marble hallways grow unsteady, and the radiant beauty of yore is now but a portrait rusted by time and bitter brew. Your mind begins to be invaded by ghosts of paranoia. You see betrayal in the eyes of every servant, hear conspiracies in every whisper of the capital's elite. Walter Winchell called you the craziest woman in Washington, D.C., and perhaps, in this ultimate isolation, the boundary between reality and delusion has truly blurred. You believe people are stealing your belongings, rummaging through top-secret papers to sell to rivals. This fear is so great that you never part from your pistol, keeping it by your pillow, in the car, and in your purse, like a soldier entrenched in a final fortress. Your most loyal attendants leave one by one, unable to endure your suspicion, leaving you amidst a constantly changing staff who look at you with more fear than respect. Despite your crumbling body, you still attempt to run the Times-Herald in an obsessive manner. You call editors at odd hours, issuing sharp or crazed instructions in your drunken state. You know the newspaper is the last thread connecting you to the real world, the place where you are still a queen of supreme power. The newsroom staff learns to ignore your most irrational orders, yet they still tremble before Cissy's majesty. You stand by the window watching the delivery trucks depart, feeling a bitter gratification knowing that even as you die within this mansion, your voice still echoes throughout the capital every day. In these twilight years, you suddenly begin distributing your massive fortune to charities with a generosity that is almost frenzied. You sign checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars for children's hospitals, orphanages, and veterans organizations. When you decide to fund the new wing of the Washington Children's Hospital, you initially refuse to have your name on it, but then agree to let it be named the Patterson Wing. Perhaps it is a belated effort to atone for past accusations of treason, or simply that you want to leave a mark of benevolence in a world that already has too much hatred. The donations for single mothers carry a poignant meaning, reflecting the pain of losing a child that you carried your whole life, a wound that money could never heal. You establish scholarships for female journalism students, giving opportunities to impoverished girls you never knew. You set up a support fund for journalists fired for political reasons, a bit of self-deprecating irony, considering these very hands once ruthlessly fired so many just because they dared to go against your will. Your generosity in this phase is anonymous and distant. You give money but do not need thanks. You help servants pay debts but do not want to hear them explain. To you now, money is only soulless numbers on paper, a currency you try to use to buy back peace for the soul, but loneliness stubbornly stays out of every transaction. Your will becomes the final weapon to manipulate those around you. You constantly call lawyers to change terms, striking one name, adding another based on the erratic emotions of your drinking bouts. The document, dozens of pages long with contradictory orders, is the embodiment of your chaotic mind. At times, you want to leave everything to your daughter Felicia. At others, you want to sell the paper for charity. One night in July 1948, in anger and despair, you ordered your lawyer to leave everything to your employees, the only ones who stayed by you when everyone else had left. Write it down. When everything goes to the staff, they're the only ones who stayed. You know this will be the trigger for a brutal legal war after you pass. And perhaps that is your final revenge against the world. The relationship with Felicia is now but a pile of cold ash. Your daughter publicly declared a divorce from her mother years ago, refusing all efforts at reconciliation and only sending back empty birthday cards. In a letter written in 1944 that you never had the courage to send, you bitterly admitted your inability to love. I do not know how else to love people except by fighting their enemies. And when you had no enemies left, I suppose I became one. You realized the tragedy of your life was using protection as a form of invasion, and ultimately, you inadvertently pushed the person you loved most into the hands of the enemy. In the final days of July 1948, you imprison yourself in your bedroom at DuPont Circle. You order the servants to pull the heavy velvet curtains tight, refusing even the sunlight, which has become too harsh for your weary eyes. You live in a dark and silent world where time seems to have stopped. You lie on the massive bed, feeling the pulse of your heart weakening, beat by beat, like a printing press running out of ink. You no longer write, no longer argue. There are only memories of a brilliant Chicago, a flamboyant Vienna, and the rolling rivers of the West. You are ready to let go, to shed the tarred crown that has weighed on your head for decades. On the night of the 23rd of July 1948, you eat very little, taking your final pills with a glass of strong scotch. You watch the servant close the curtains that were already shut, then slowly close your eyes. On the morning of July 24, when the personal attendant opens the door and receives no reprimand or order, they realize the Queen has left her kingdom forever. You passed away at the age of 66 due to heart failure, a strangely quiet end for a life that only knew noise and struggle. Your funeral at St. Matter, John's Episcopal Church, gathers Washington's elite, but amidst the flowery eulogies, it seems not a single true tear falls. Felicia stands there, cold and distant like a stranger witnessing the collapse of a dynasty. As soon as you were laid down, your Times Herald empire became the center of pragmatic legal battles. The will leaving the paper to 7 executives sparked a loud lawsuit led by Felicia and Drew Pearson. Eventually, the paper fell into the hands of your cousin Robert McCormick and was merged into the Washington Post in 1954, erasing all traces of the independent media empire you spent a lifetime building. You are gone, leaving behind a massive fortune but also a painful lesson on the price of power and solitude. Eleanor Cissy Patterson, the woman who had everything in the world but left it in physical decay and absolute loneliness, is now but a faint headline in the history of American journalism. You lie still in the flower-covered coffin, feeling the absolute silence you always craved. You no longer hear the printing presses, no longer feel the weight of the gun in your purse. There is only the lightness of nothingness as your soul begins to leave the DuPont Circle mansion. You step out of the room's darkness, your hands skimming the velvet curtains one last time, then vanish into the light of an eternal dawn. where hatreds and crowns of power no longer mean anything. You walk out toward the grand hall of the mansion, where servants stand with bowed heads in respectful silence. You do not turn to look at the Medill family portraits hanging on the walls, but slowly step down the cold marble stairs, your feet aimlessly heading toward DuPont Circle Square, which is hazy in the early morning mist of the summer of 1948. Conclusion: Cissy Patterson, closing the shadows of a dynasty. The pale yellow light from DuPont Circle outside is now just a faint glow by the window of your mind. The life of Cissy Patterson, from a debutante living in silk to a powerful but lonely media queen, now recedes like a thin plume of smoke vanishing into the night of Washington history. All the supreme power, all the fierce battles on the pages, and the nameless pains of loss have found their final stillness under the dust of time. What remains in you now is not the bustle of sensational headlines or political intrigues, but a deep sense of peace in realizing that after all the human storms, everyone needs a place to belong, a lull for the soul to truly rest. The sound of the printing presses from the distant newsroom fades away, giving way to the steady and gentle rhythm of the quiet night. Take a deep breath once more, feeling the relief spreading through your body, letting go of all the worries of the long day. Close your eyes and let the story of Cissy Patterson quietly drift into the distant realm of memory, where dreams will cradle you with the utmost tenderness. Wishing you a very deep, very good sleep and a tomorrow full of new energy.